The morning sun cast long shadows across the winding mountain road as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her rearview mirror one more time, catching sight of her two children in the back seat. 8-year-old Emma was already fast asleep against the window, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her small hands, while 10-year-old Jake stared out at the towering pine trees with wide-eyed wonder. "Are we almost there, Mom?" Jake asked for what felt like the 100th time since they'd left Charlotte 3 hours earlier. "Just another 20 minutes, sweetheart," Sarah replied, exchanging a knowing glance with her husband David, who was studying the GPS on his phone. With the focused concentration he usually reserved for his accounting work. This trip had been planned for months, their first real family vacation in over 2 years. Between David's demanding job at the firm and Sarah's work as a high school counselor, finding time for themselves had become nearly impossible. The kids had been asking for a real adventure, something different from their usual summer routine of day camps and visits to Sarah's mother. That's when Sarah had discovered the listing on Airbnb. Mountain Vista Retreat, they called it. A secluded cabin perched high in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, promising breathtaking views, complete privacy, and an unforgettable experience away from the chaos of modern life. The photos had been absolutely stunning. A rustic but modern log cabin with floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound deck overlooking endless mountain peaks, and a cozy stone fireplace that seemed to invite long evenings of family time. The host, listed as Marcus Webb, had maintained a 5-star rating with glowing reviews. "True wilderness experience," one guest had written. "You'll feel like you're the only people in the world." Another had raved about the silence, describing it as so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. That silence had been exactly what Sarah craved. Her days were filled with the constant noise of teenagers sharing their problems, parents calling about their children's futures, and the general chaos that came with working in education. David, too, seemed perpetually on edge, his phone constantly buzzing with client emergencies and tax deadlines. Even their evenings at home were punctuated by the neighbor's dog barking, traffic from the busy street outside their subdivision, and the endless hum of suburban life. "Look at that," David suddenly exclaimed, pointing toward a gap in the trees where the mountains revealed themselves in their full glory. Rolling peaks stretched to the horizon, painted in every shade of green imaginable, with wisps of morning mist still clinging to the valleys between them. Emma stirred in the back seat, rubbing her eyes as she pressed her face to the window. "Wow," she whispered, and Sarah felt her heart swell with the simple joy of seeing her daughter's wonder. The final stretch of road grew increasingly narrow, winding through dense forest that seemed to close in around them like a protective embrace. Cell phone signal bars disappeared one by one until David's phone showed no service at all. "Perfect," he said with genuine satisfaction, sliding the device into his pocket. "Complete digital detox, just like we planned." Sarah felt a small flutter of anxiety at being so disconnected, but she pushed it aside. This was what they needed, what their family needed. Time to reconnect with each other without the constant distractions of their hyper-connected world. The cabin appeared suddenly as they rounded the final curve, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was even more beautiful than the photos had suggested. Built from rich, honey-colored logs and nestled into the mountainside as if it had grown there naturally, the house seemed to be part of the landscape itself. The wraparound deck she'd admired online was even more impressive in person, offering what appeared to be a 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. "This is it," she said softly, more to herself than to her family. "This is exactly what we needed." David pulled into the gravel driveway beside the covered parking area, and the family sat in momentary silence, taking in their surroundings. The quiet was indeed profound. No traffic, no neighbors, no urban soundtrack at all. Just the gentle whisper of wind through the pines and the distant call of a bird somewhere in the forest. "Can we explore right now?" Jake asked, already unbuckling his seatbelt with the eager energy that had made him such a handful during the long drive. "Let's get settled in first," Sarah said, though she was equally eager to see the interior of their home for the next week. She pulled out her phone to check in with the Airbnb app, but frowned when she saw the no service message on her screen. "The listing mentioned that cell service is spotty up here," David reminded her, already unloading their suitcases from the trunk. "Part of the charm, remember? We're supposed to be disconnecting. Sarah nodded but made a mental note to ask about the house's Wi-Fi password once they got inside. Complete disconnection was one thing, but as a mother, she couldn't shake the ingrained need to know she could reach the outside world if necessary. The front door was a massive piece of solid wood, painted forest green and adorned with a wreath of pine boughs and wild mountain laurel. Attached to the door was a small lockbox with a combination that David had been given in his confirmation email. He spun the dials carefully, 2847, and retrieved a set of keys along with a welcome note printed on heavy cardstock. "Welcome to Mountain Vista Retreat," David read aloud as Sarah and the children gathered around him on the broad front porch. "We hope your stay is truly unforgettable. Please make yourselves completely at home. The house is yours to enjoy as if it were your own family cabin." Additional information and emergency contacts can be found in the welcome binder on the kitchen counter. The interior of the cabin exceeded every expectation Sarah had harbored. The main living area was dominated by a stone fireplace that rose 2 stories to the vaulted ceiling, flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the mountain view like a living painting. Comfortable leather furniture, arranged around a large coffee table made from what appeared to be a single cross-section of an enormous tree trunk, created an inviting space that seemed designed for family gatherings. The kitchen was a perfect blend of rustic charm and modern convenience, with granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a large island that would be perfect for family meals. Emma immediately claimed one of the high stools at the island, spinning around with delight. "This is like a castle," she announced, and Sarah had to agree. There was something almost magical about the space. The way the natural light poured, gan through the windows, the subtle scent of pine and cedar that permeated everything, the sense of being suspended between earth and sky. David found the welcome binder exactly where the note had indicated, a thick leather folder filled with information about the house, the surrounding area, and local attractions. As he flipped through it, Sarah explored the rest of the main floor, discovering a guest bedroom, a full bathroom, and a mudroom that opened onto the back deck. "Mom, come see this," Jake called from upstairs, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged space. Sarah climbed the rustic log staircase to find her son standing in the doorway of what was clearly the master bedroom. Like the living area below, it featured enormous windows with stunning views, along with a king-sized bed that looked incredibly inviting after their early morning departure. "And look at this," Jake continued, leading her to the second upstairs bedroom. "Emma and I can share, or she can have this one and I'll take the pull-out couch downstairs. It's like having our own adventure base camp." The children's enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah felt the last of her travel stress melting away. This was going to be perfect. A full week of hiking, family games, cooking together, and just being present with each other in this beautiful, peaceful place. "Did you find the emergency contacts?" she asked David when she rejoined him in the kitchen. "Right here," he said, showing her a laminated card with several phone numbers. Local sheriff, fire department, the property management company, and someone named Janet Collins, who appears to be the local contact person for any issues. Sarah made note of the numbers, then helped David carry in the rest of their luggage while the children raced around the house, claiming bedrooms and exploring every corner of their temporary home. By late afternoon, they had settled in completely. Their clothes were unpacked, groceries were stocked in the refrigerator, and David had successfully started a fire in the massive stone fireplace despite his usual struggles with such tasks. The family gathered in the living room as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. "I want to remember this exact moment forever," Sarah said, pulling Emma closer on the couch while Jake sprawled on the hearth rug, sketching. The view in the drawing pad he'd brought along. "We should come here every year," Emma said dreamily. "We could make it our special place." David nodded from his position in the large leather chair, looking more relaxed than Sarah had seen him in months. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. This could become our family tradition." As darkness fell, the sense of peaceful isolation became even more pronounced. With no artificial lights visible anywhere in the surrounding landscape, the stars appeared with a brilliance that city dwellers rarely experience. David and the children spent an hour on the deck with the binoculars he'd packed, identifying constellations and marveling at the Milky Way stretching across the clear mountain sky. That first night, they stayed up later than usual, reluctant to end the magical beginning of their vacation. Sarah prepared hot chocolate, while David added another log to the fire, and they played board games until nearly midnight, something they hadn't done as a family in far too long. Bentiu. They finally headed to bed. Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment settling over her. This trip was already everything she'd hoped it would be. The children were happy and engaged. David was genuinely relaxed, and she could feel the stress of their daily lives beginning to slip away, like an old, uncomfortable coat finally being shed. The second day dawned clear and cool, perfect for the hiking adventure they'd planned. After a leisurely breakfast on the deck, they set out to explore the trail system that began just behind the cabin. Jake had studied the area maps in the welcome binder and appointed himself the family navigator, leading them along a well-marked path that wound through the forest. The hiking was moderate but rewarding, taking them to several scenic overlooks where they stopped for water breaks and photos. Emma collected interesting rocks and leaves for a nature journal she'd decided to start, while Jake practiced his photography skills with David's digital camera. "I can see why people fall in love with places like this," Sarah told David as they sat on a fallen log, watching their children explore a small creek that crossed the trail. "There's something about being this far away from everything that makes you remember what's really important." David nodded, absently twirling his wedding ring, a nervous habit Sarah had noticed he'd developed over the past year as work pressures increased. "I keep reaching for my phone to check email," he admitted. "It's like a reflex I can't turn off." "Give it a few days," Sarah encouraged him. "Remember that yoga retreat I went on last year? It took me 3 days to stop feeling phantom phone vibrations in my pocket." They returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, pleasantly tired, and ready for a quiet evening. Sarah prepared a simple dinner, while the children played card games, and David attempted to solve a wooden puzzle he'd found on one of the cabin's bookshelves. It was as they were finishing dinner that Emma made the observation that would later seem significant. "Mom," she said, looking out the kitchen window toward the tree line, "is someone supposed to be watching us?" Sarah turned to follow her daughter's gaze, but saw only the darkening forest. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I thought I saw someone standing between those big trees over there," Emma said, pointing toward a gap in the pines about 50 yards from the cabin. "Just standing really still like they were looking at our house." David joined them at the window, scanning the area Emma had indicated. "I don't see anything, Em. Sometimes shadows and tree branches can look like people, especially when it's getting dark." "I know what shadows look like," Emma said with the slight indignation that children reserve for adults who don't take them seriously. This looked like a real person. Sarah felt a small chill run down her spine, though she couldn't say exactly why. The cabin was isolated, but it wasn't impossible that there might be other hikers in the area, or even neighbors who lived further up the mountain. Still, something about the idea of someone standing motionless in the forest, watching their cabin, made her uncomfortable. "Well, we're safe inside," she said, reaching over to close the kitchen curtains. "And if someone was just passing through, they're probably long gone by now." But as the family settled in for their second evening at Mountain Vista Retreat, Sarah found herself glancing toward the windows more frequently than usual, and she made sure to check that all the doors were locked before they went to bed. The third day brought rain, which kept them inside but gave them an opportunity to explore the cabin more thoroughly. In the basement, they discovered a game room complete with a pool table, air hockey, and shelves lined with board games and puzzles. Jake became obsessed with the air hockey table, while Emma discovered a collection of children's books that seemed to have been specifically chosen for guests with young families. Sarah spent part of the morning going through the welcome binder more carefully, reading about local wildlife, hiking recommendations, and safety information. It was then that she noticed something that struck her as odd. While the binder contained extensive information about the property and the surrounding area, there was very little personal information about the host, Marcus Webb. Most Airbnb properties she'd stayed at included at least a brief bio of the owner, often with photos and personal touches that helped guests feel connected to their host. But this binder was purely informational. almost clinical in its thoroughness. Even the welcome note they'd found upon arrival was generic enough that it could have been left for any guest. "Did you ever hear back from the host about anything?" she asked David, who was reading a novel by the fireplace while rain drummed steadily against the windows. "What do you mean?" "I sent a message through the app before we left, just asking about the best hiking trails for kids. I never got a response." David shrugged. Maybe he's one of those hands-off hosts. Some people prefer to let guests discover things on their own rather than bombarding them with recommendations. Sarah nodded, but something about the complete silence from their host continued to bother her. Most Airbnb hosts she'd encountered were eager to ensure their guests had a positive experience, often checking in frequently to offer assistance or local insights. The rain continued through the afternoon, creating a cozy atmosphere that was perfect for family time. They played board games, worked on puzzles, and David even attempted to teach the children poker using M&Ms as chips. Emma proved to be surprisingly good at bluffing, while Jake's competitive nature made him take each hand far too seriously. As evening approached, the rain began to taper off, though thick clouds still obscured the mountain views they'd grown accustomed to enjoying. Sarah prepared another family dinner, and they ate by candlelight when David discovered that the cabin had an impressive collection of pillar candles and brass candlesticks. "This is so romantic," Emma declared, apparently having picked up the word from some movie or book. "Like we're pioneers living in the wilderness." "Pioneers had to work a lot harder than this," Jake pointed out with his characteristic practicality. "They didn't have refrigerators or indoor plumbing." "Well, we're modern pioneers then," Emma decided, unwilling to let her brother's logic dampen her enthusiasm. After dinner, they moved to the living room where David had built another fire. The combination of the crackling flames, the gentle sound of rain on the roof, and the warm glow of the candlelight created an atmosphere of perfect peace and contentment. It was nearly 10 o'clock when they first heard the sound. Sarah was reading quietly while David worked on the wooden puzzle, and the children played a quiet game of Go Fish on the hearth rug. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the mountain in profound silence. The sound came from somewhere outside, a sharp, metallic bang, as if someone had dropped a piece of steel equipment or slammed a car door very hard. All four family members looked up simultaneously, their attention focused on the large windows that faced the front of the property. "What was that?" Emma asked, her voice smaller than usual. David set down his puzzle and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. With no exterior lights visible anywhere and heavy cloud cover obscuring the moon and stars, the night was utterly black. "Probably just the wind knocking something over," he said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Maybe a piece of patio furniture or something." They waited in silence for a few minutes, listening intently, but the sound wasn't repeated. Gradually, the family returned to their activities, though Sarah noticed that everyone seemed a bit more alert, a bit more aware of the sounds of the night. 20 minutes later, they heard it again. This time it was accompanied by what sounded like rhythmic tapping, as if someone were striking metal against wood in a steady pattern. "That's not the wind," Jake said quietly. David stood again, this time moving toward the front door. "I'm going to take a quick look around the property." "No," Sarah said quickly, surprised by the sharpness in her own voice. "I mean, it's completely dark out there. If someone's having car trouble or something, they'll come to the door." David paused with his hand on the door handle, considering her words. "You're probably right. And if it's just some piece of equipment that's come loose in the rain, it'll wait until morning." But the sounds continued intermittently for the next hour, sometimes the metallic banging, sometimes the rhythmic tapping, and once what sounded like something heavy being dragged across gravel. Each occurrence sent a small spike of adrenaline through Sarah's system, though she tried to remain calm for the children's sake. By the time they decided to head to bed, the sounds had stopped completely. David made a point of checking all the doors and windows, ensuring everything was securely locked, though he did so casually to avoid alarming Emma and Jake. "Mom," Emma whispered, as Sarah tucked her into the guest bedroom she'd chosen, "do you think whoever I saw in the trees is the same person making those noises?" Sarah's first instinct was to dismiss her daughter's concern, to offer reassurance that would help her sleep peacefully. But something about the combination of Emma's earlier observation and the evening's strange sounds made her pause. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly, "but we're safe inside the house, and Daddy and I are going to make sure nothing bothers us." "Can you leave the hallway light on?" Emma asked. Of course. As Sarah kissed her daughter goodnight and moved to check on Jake, she made a mental decision. If they heard any more unexplained sounds during the night, she would insist that David investigate, darkness or no darkness. Whatever was happening, outside their peaceful mountain retreat, she was determined to protect her family. The house settled into quiet as the Mitchell family prepared for sleep on their third night at Mountain Vista Retreat. Outside, the mountain darkness was complete and silent, as if the wilderness itself were holding its breath. None of them could have imagined that this would be their last peaceful night in the cabin that had promised them an unforgettable experience. Sarah lay awake for a long time, listening to David's steady breathing beside her and straining her ears for any repetition of the strange sounds they'd heard earlier. But the night remained quiet, and eventually exhaustion won over anxiety. Tomorrow, she told herself as sleep finally claimed her, she would ask David to walk around the property in daylight to see if he could identify the source of the noises. Tomorrow they would solve this small mystery and get back to enjoying their family vacation. But tomorrow would bring discoveries that would transform their peaceful retreat into something far more sinister than any of them could have anticipated. Chapter 2. Cracks in Paradise. The fourth morning at Mountain Vista Retreat dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant mountain sunshine that made the previous night's mysterious sounds seem like a half-remembered dream. Sarah woke before the rest of her family, slipping quietly out of bed to make coffee and enjoy a few moments of solitude on the deck. As she stood with her steaming mug, watching the morning mist rise from the valleys below, she could almost convince herself that they'd overreacted to what were probably just normal wilderness sounds. Mountain properties surely had all sorts of equipment that could rattle in the wind. Generators, outdoor furniture, maybe even wildlife getting into garbage cans or storage areas. The peace was interrupted by David joining her, his own coffee in hand and his hair still tousled from sleep. "Sleep well?" he asked, settling into one of the deck chairs beside her. "Eventually," Sarah admitted. "I kept listening for more of those sounds." "Me too." David was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee and gazing out at the view. "I was thinking, why don't I take a walk around the property this morning, just to see if there's anything obvious? So that might have been making noise, loose siding maybe, or some outdoor equipment that needs to be secured." Sarah felt a wave of relief. "I was hoping you'd say that. I know it's probably nothing, but it's hard to relax when you don't." "Know what's going on," David finished. "I get it. Let me grab some breakfast first, and then I'll do a thorough inspection. If I find anything concerning, we can call that local contact number in the welcome binder." The children appeared shortly after, both drawn downstairs by the aroma of the pancakes Sarah had started making. Jake seemed to have forgotten about the previous night's disturbances, immediately launching into plans for another hiking adventure. But Emma was quieter than usual, often glancing toward the windows as if expecting to see something. After breakfast, David set out to walk the perimeter of the property while Sarah and the children cleaned up the kitchen. From the windows, she could see him moving methodically around the cabin, examining the foundation, checking the area under the deck, and investigating what appeared to be a small storage shed they hadn't noticed before. He was gone for nearly an hour, and when he returned, his expression was thoughtful rather than relieved. "Did you find anything?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice casual, since the children were within earshot. "A few things," David said carefully. "Nothing dangerous, but why don't we step outside for a minute?" Sarah's stomach tightened, but she managed to smile at Emma and Jake. "You two can start planning our next hike. We'll be right back." Once they were alone on the deck, David led her to the railing and pointed toward an area of disturbed ground near the tree line. "See those marks in the dirt over there? That's definitely where the dragging sound was coming from last night. Something heavy was moved across that area recently, probably within the last day or two." Sarah squinted at the spot he indicated. Even from the deck, she could make out what looked like deep grooves in the soft earth, as if something substantial had been pulled from the edge of the forest toward somewhere. Could it have been maintenance equipment? She asked, though her voice sounded uncertain even to herself. Maybe, David said. But here's what's really odd. I found that storage shed I mentioned, and it's locked with a heavy-duty padlock. The kind of lock you use for something valuable or dangerous, not just basic yard tools. Did you try to see what's inside? It doesn't have any windows, and the lock looks new, very new, like it was installed recently. David paused, running, his hand through his hair in the gesture Sarah recognized as his way of processing something that bothered him. There's something else. I found tire tracks near the back of the property, fresh ones, made since the rain stopped last night. The implication hit Sarah immediately. Someone had been on the property during the night, driving a vehicle while they slept. David, she said quietly, I think we need to call someone, the local contact person or maybe even the sheriff. And tell them what? That we heard some noises and found tire tracks on a property that isn't ours. David shook his head. They'll think we're paranoid city people who can't handle a few wilderness sounds. But what about the person Emma saw in the trees, and now tire tracks from last night? David was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing their options. Let me try calling the host first, Marcus Webb. I'll see if he can explain any of this. Maybe there's maintenance work being done that he forgot to mention. They went back inside, where David retrieved his phone and attempted to place a call to the number listed in their Airbnb correspondence. Sarah watched his face as he held the phone to his ear, listening to what was apparently endless ringing. Straight to voicemail, he said finally, ending the call without leaving a message. And it's just a generic voicemail greeting. Doesn't even say his name. Try the property management company, Sarah suggested, though she was beginning to feel a growing sense of unease about their situation. David dialed the number from the welcome binder, and this time someone answered on the third ring. Mountain Properties Management, this is Janet Collins. Sarah could hear the woman's voice clearly in the quiet cabin, and she moved closer to David so she could follow the conversation. Hi, this is David Mitchell. My family and I are staying at Mountain Vista Retreat, the property owned by Marcus Webb. We've had some concerns about possible maintenance activity on the property, and I was hoping you could clarify a few things for us. There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough that David checked his phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. I'm sorry, Janet Collins said finally, but I'm not familiar with that property. Could you give me the address? David provided the address, and Sarah heard the sound of typing on a keyboard. I'm not showing any properties at that address in our management portfolio, Janet said, her voice taking on a more cautious tone. Are you certain you have the right property management company? David frowned, double-checking the number in the welcome binder. This is the number listed in the guest information at the property. Well, I can tell you that we definitely don't manage a property called Mountain Vista Retreat. You might want to contact the property owner directly. After David ended the call, he and Sarah stared at each other in growing confusion. That doesn't make any sense, Sarah said. Why would the welcome binder have the wrong property management company? Maybe it's an old binder, David suggested, though he didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. Or maybe the owner switched companies and forgot to update the information. Sarah pulled out her own phone and attempted to access the Airbnb app to review their reservation details. But with no cell service and no Wi-Fi password, she couldn't connect to the internet. David, she said slowly, when we checked in, how were we supposed to mark our arrival in the app? David paused, clearly trying to remember. I assumed I'd do it once we got Wi-Fi access, but now that you mention it, I never got the network password. A cold realization was beginning to dawn on both of them. They had driven 3 hours into an isolated mountain location to stay at a property where they couldn't reach the host, couldn't verify their reservation, and where someone appeared to be conducting unknown activities during the night. Okay, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Let's think about this rationally. We have the keys, we have a confirmation email from Airbnb, and someone clearly prepared the house for guests. The beds were made, there were fresh towels, and the refrigerator was clean and ready for our groceries. You're right, David agreed, though Sarah could see he was struggling with the same doubts she was experiencing. We're probably just overthinking this, because of the strange sounds last night. But even as they attempted to rationalize their situation, Both of them knew something wasn't right. The accumulation of small inconsistencies and unexplained phenomena was becoming too significant to dismiss. "What do we tell the kids?" Sarah asked. "Nothing for now," David decided. "No point in worrying them when we don't really know what's going on. But I think we should be prepared to leave if things get any stranger." "You mean cut the vacation short?" "If necessary. Our safety is more important than a week in the mountains." Sarah nodded, though the thought of disappointing Emma and Jake after they'd been looking forward to this trip for so long made her heart ache. Still, the protective instincts that had been honed by years of motherhood were beginning to override her desire for a peaceful family vacation. They spent the rest of the morning trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for the children's sake. Jake had planned another hiking expedition, this time to a waterfall marked on one of the trail maps in the welcome binder. The family set out after lunch, following a well-maintained path that wound deeper into the wilderness than they'd ventured before. The hike was beautiful and the waterfall spectacular, providing enough distraction that Sarah was able to temporarily push aside her worries about the property. Emma collected more specimens for her nature journal, while Jake practiced his photography, and for a few hours it almost felt like the vacation they'd planned. But as they made their way back to the cabin in the late afternoon, Sarah found herself studying the surrounding forest with new eyes. Every rustling of leaves in the breeze, every bird call, every shadow between the trees seemed potentially significant. She caught herself scanning the tree line for human figures, remembering Emma's observation from their first day. It was as they approached the cabin that Jake made the discovery that would shift their concern from unease to genuine alarm. "Dad," he called from slightly ahead of them on the trail, "why is our front door open?" Sarah's blood ran cold. They had been meticulous about locking the cabin when they left, a habit formed from years of city living. David always double-checked the locks, and Sarah had specifically watched him do it before their hike. David immediately put his arm out to stop the family from advancing further toward the house. "Everyone stay right here," he said quietly. "Don't move until I tell you to." "David, don't go in there alone," Sarah whispered urgently. "I'm just going to check from the porch," he assured her, though she could see the tension in his shoulders as he approached the cabin. From their position on the trail, Sarah could see that the front door was indeed standing partially open, not just unlocked, but actually ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry or wanted to ensure they could return without fumbling with keys. David reached the porch and called out loudly, "Hello? Is anyone there? We're the guests staying at this property." Silence. He pushed the door open wider and stepped just inside the threshold. "Hello?" he called again, his voice echoing in the interior of the cabin. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, David reappeared on the porch and waved them forward. "It's empty," he called to them. "But you need to see this." Sarah's heart was pounding as she and the children approached the cabin. What they saw when they stepped inside made her stomach drop. Someone had definitely been inside the house, not to steal anything. As far as Sarah could tell, nothing was missing. But their belongings had been disturbed in subtle ways that suggested a thorough search. Drawers in the kitchen were slightly open. The welcome binder had been moved to a different position on the counter. Their suitcases upstairs appeared to have been opened and carefully gone through. Most unsettling of all, the fireplace had been rebuilt. The careful arrangement of logs and kindling that David had prepared that morning was gone, replaced by a new configuration that looked professional but somehow ominous. "Who would do this?" Emma asked in a small voice, clearly picking up on the adult's distress even though she didn't fully understand what was happening. "I don't know, sweetheart," Sarah said, pulling her daughter close while her mind raced through possibilities. Burglars wouldn't have left everything behind. Maintenance workers would have announced themselves or left a note. The host would have contacted them before entering. "We're leaving," David announced suddenly. "Right now. Everyone pack your bags. Just grab everything and throw it in the suitcases. We're not staying here another night." "But Daddy," Jake protested, "we still have 3 more days of vacation left." "We'll go to a hotel," David said firmly. "This will still be a vacation, just a different kind of vacation." As the family hurried to gather their belongings, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every window in the cabin suddenly seemed like a potential vantage point for unseen eyes, and the shadows cast by the late afternoon sun appeared to hide threats she couldn't identify. It was as David was loading their suitcases into the car that they heard the voice. Going somewhere. The words came from behind them, near the edge of the forest, spoken by a man they couldn't immediately see in the gathering dusk. David straightened slowly, positioning himself between his family and the voice. "We're checking out early," he called toward the trees. "Personal emergency." A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, lean man in work clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He appeared to be in his 40s, with weathered hands and the kind of tan that came from spending most of his time outdoors. "Name's Roy," the man said, walking closer to them with the unhurried confidence of someone completely comfortable in the wilderness. "I do maintenance work around these properties. Didn't mean to startle you folks." "Are you the one who was in our cabin today?" David asked directly. Roy stopped about 10 feet away from them, close enough to converse normally, but far enough to avoid seeming threatening. "Had to check the heating system," he said. "Owner called this morning, said guests reported some noises, thought it might be the furnace acting up." "No one called us," Sarah said, finding her voice despite her nervousness. "We weren't told anyone would be entering the property." Roy shrugged. "Owner probably figured it was better to just fix the problem than bother you folks on your vacation. Sometimes the heating system makes noises when the temperature drops at night." His explanation was reasonable, even logical, but something about the man's demeanor made Sarah deeply uncomfortable. He stood too still, spoke too calmly, and his eyes seemed to be cataloging details about their family with an intensity that felt inappropriate for a casual maintenance worker. "Well, as I said, we're leaving early," David said, continuing to load their bags. "Family emergency." "That's a shame," Roy said. "This is such a peaceful place. Hardly anyone ever comes up this way. You folks could have gone days without seeing another soul." There was something in the way he said it that made Sarah's skin crawl. Not quite a threat, but not entirely innocent either. "Come on, everyone," David said, opening the car doors. "Let's get going." As the family piled into their vehicle, Roy remained standing in the same spot, watching them with an unreadable expression. Sarah found herself avoiding eye contact with him as David started the engine and began backing out of the driveway. It wasn't until they had driven several miles down the mountain road that any of them spoke. "That guy gave me the creeps," Jake said finally, voicing what they were all thinking. "He seemed nice enough," David said, though Sarah could hear the uncertainty in his voice, "just trying to do his job." "Then why didn't the owner tell us someone was coming to the house?" Sarah asked. "And why couldn't we reach the property management company? And what about those tire tracks you found this morning?" David was quiet for a moment, navigating the winding mountain road as darkness began to fall around them. "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but I'm glad we're leaving." Emma, who had been unusually quiet since their encounter with Roy, suddenly spoke up from the back seat. "Mom," she said, "that man, he was the person I saw watching us from the trees that first night." Sarah turned to look at her daughter, her heart skipping a beat. "Are you sure, Em?" "I'm sure he's been watching us the whole time we've been here." The implication of Emma's words settled over the car like a suffocating blanket. If the maintenance worker had been observing their family for days without identifying himself, then his presence at the cabin that afternoon took on a much more sinister meaning. David increased their speed as much as the mountain curves would safely allow, and Sarah found herself checking the rearview mirror frequently, half expecting to see headlights following them down the mountain. They had come to Mountain Vista Retreat, seeking peace and family bonding. Instead, they were fleeing into the night with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that their week in paradise had never been what it seemed. As the lights of the valley finally came into view, Sarah allowed herself to believe they had escaped whatever dark purpose had been hiding behind the beautiful facade of their mountain getaway. But their ordeal was far from over. In fact, the most terrifying discoveries still lay ahead. Chapter 3. Into the Darkness. The Hampton Inn in the small town of Cedar Ridge felt like a sanctuary compared to the isolated mountain cabin they'd fled. Sarah sat on the edge of one of the double beds, watching David pace between the window and the door, while Emma and Jake sprawled on the other bed, quietly playing a card game that couldn't quite mask their confusion about the sudden change in their vacation plans. "I'm going to call the police," David announced suddenly, stopping his restless movement to face Sarah. "Something isn't right about any of this, and we need to report it." "Report what exactly?" Sarah asked, though she wanted answers as much as he did. "That we heard some noises and met a maintenance worker who made us uncomfortable. That someone was watching our family for days without identifying themselves. That someone went through our belongings without permission. That the property management information was wrong and we can't reach the host." Sarah nodded, realizing he was right. When laid out that way, their experience sounded much more serious than just vacation anxiety. "Should we wait until we get home?" she asked. "No. If something criminal is happening at that property, the local authorities need to know about it. And if other families are planning to stay there..." David trailed off, but Sarah understood his meaning. They couldn't live with themselves if another family walked into the same situation they'd just escaped. David found the number for the local sheriff's department and made the call while Sarah helped the children order room service for dinner. She tried to keep her voice light and normal as they decided between chicken fingers and pizza, but her mind was racing with implications she didn't want to consider. The deputy who arrived 40 minutes later was a woman in her 30s named Officer Rachel Martinez. She had the kind of calm, professional demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease, and she listened to their story without the skepticism Sarah had feared they might encounter. "You said the property is called Mountain Vista Retreat, officer?" Martinez asked, making notes in a small notebook. "That's right, the host is listed as Marcus Webb, and it's supposed to be managed by Mountain Properties Management, but they said they'd never heard of it." Officer Martinez looked up from her notebook with an expression that made Sarah's stomach tighten with apprehension. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some more detailed questions about this property. Can you describe the exact location for me?" David provided the address they'd been given, along with detailed directions from the main highway. As he spoke, Officer Martinez's expression grew increasingly serious. "Folks," she said finally, "I've been working this area for 8 years, and I'm familiar with every property on that mountain road. The address you've given me, there's no house there." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah felt as if the floor had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. "That's impossible," David said. "We just spent 4 days there. It's a beautiful log cabin with a stone fireplace and..." "Sir, I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying there's something very wrong here." Officer Martinez leaned forward in her chair. "That address corresponds to a section of state forest land that's been undeveloped for decades. There are no private residences, no vacation rentals, nothing. But we have photos," Sarah said desperately, pulling out her phone. "We took pictures of the kids, of the view." She scrolled through her photo gallery, looking for the images they'd taken during their stay. But as she searched, her confusion deepened. There were photos from their drive up to the mountains, images of the children in the car and at a rest stop. But from the time they'd arrived at the cabin until they'd left, her phone showed no photos at all. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I know I took pictures. Emma's nature collection, Jake playing air hockey, the view from the deck." David pulled out his own phone and began searching through his gallery. His face grew pale as he scrolled. "Mine too," he said quietly. No photos from the cabin at all. Officer Martinez was watching them with growing concern. "Folks, I think you need to come with me to the station. We need to get some more detailed information about what happened to you up there." The Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Department was small but modern, housed in a building that looked like it had been built within the last decade. Officer Martinez led them to a conference room where they were joined by Sheriff Tom Bradley, a gray-haired man with kind eyes who listened to their story with the focused attention of someone who'd seen enough strange things to take any report seriously. "The first thing we need to do," Sheriff Bradley said when they'd finished recounting their experience, "is take a drive up to that location and see what's actually there." "You want us to go back?" Sarah asked, her protective instincts immediately flaring. "Not you and your family, just Officer Martinez and myself. But I would like you to stay in town tonight so we can follow up with you after we've investigated." Sarah felt both relief and anxiety at the prospect of law enforcement taking their concerns seriously. On one hand, it validated their decision to leave the property. On the other hand, It suggested that their situation might be even more serious. Then they'd realized. "What do you think is happening?" David asked. Sheriff Bradley exchanged a glance with Officer Martinez before answering. "To be honest, Mr. Mitchell, I'm not sure. But your description of events raises several red flags. The fact that you can't reach your host, can't verify your reservation, and found no record of the property with local management companies suggests this might be some kind of elaborate fraud. But we stayed there," Emma said suddenly, speaking, up from where she'd been quietly coloring in a book one of the deputies had given her. "We slept in the beds and ate at the kitchen table and played games by the fireplace." Sheriff Bradley smiled gently at Emma. "I believe you, sweetheart. We're just trying to figure out exactly what happened." After providing detailed statements and leaving contact information, the Mitchell family returned to their hotel room to wait. David called his work to extend his time off, while Sarah called her mother to update her on their situation, though she was careful to downplay the more frightening aspects of their experience. It was nearly midnight when Sheriff Bradley called their hotel room. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice grim, "we need you and your family to come back to the station. There's something you need to see." "What did you find?" David asked. "I'd rather show you in person. Can you be here?" "In 20 minutes." The drive back to the sheriff's department felt surreal. The children had fallen asleep in the car, and Sarah found herself staring out at the dark mountain silhouettes, trying to reconcile what Officer Martinez had told them with the vivid memories of their 4 days at the cabin. At the station, Sheriff Bradley led them to the same conference room, where he'd set up a laptop computer connected to a large monitor. "What I'm about to show you was taken with a drone about an hour ago," he explained. "This is aerial footage of the exact coordinates you provided for Mountain Vista Retreat." The video began with a bird's-eye view of dense forest, the kind of pristine wilderness that covered much of the mountain region. As the drone moved lower, Sarah could see a rough clearing in the trees but no structures of any kind. "I don't understand," she said. "Where's the cabin?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Sheriff Bradley replied. "The clearing you see there is the only open space in that area, and it's been naturally occurring for decades. No buildings, no driveways, no infrastructure of any kind." David stared at the screen, his face a mask of confusion and growing concern. "Are you sure you have the right coordinates?" "Positive. We triple-checked the GPS location based on the address you provided." Sheriff Bradley paused the video. "But there's more. Officer Martinez, would you show them what we found on the ground?" Officer Martinez opened a file folder and spread several photographs across the conference table. Sarah leaned forward to examine them, and her breath caught in her throat. The photos showed the forest clearing from ground level, and scattered throughout the area were personal items that she recognized immediately. Emma's stuffed rabbit, Jake's drawing pad, one of David's hiking boots, her own reading glasses, which she'd been sure she'd packed carefully in her suitcase. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "Mrs. Mitchell," Sheriff Bradley said gently, "can you tell me exactly when you last remember being at the cabin?" Sarah thought carefully, trying to recall specific details from their last evening at the property. "Yesterday. We had dinner, played some games by the fire, went to bed around 10 o'clock, and this morning. We woke up, had coffee. David walked around the property." She paused, realizing that her memories of that morning seemed strangely vague, like trying to remember a dream. "Then we went hiking, came back and found the door open." "Ma'am, what day do you think it is?" The question struck Sarah as odd, but she answered automatically. "Thursday evening." Officer Martinez and Sheriff Bradley exchanged a meaningful look. "Mrs. Mitchell," Officer Martinez said quietly, "today is Monday. According to your hotel registration, you checked in here 6 days ago. You've been in Cedar Ridge for nearly a week." The room seemed to spin around Sarah. She grabbed David's hand, searching his face for some sign that the officers were mistaken, but she saw the same confusion and growing fear that she was experiencing. "That's impossible," David said. "We just left the cabin a few hours ago. We've been at this hotel for one night." Sheriff Bradley pulled out another file and opened it to reveal what appeared to be hotel records. "According to the Hampton Inn, your family checked in last Tuesday evening. You've been staying there ever since, though the front desk staff reports that your behavior has been unusual." "What do you mean unusual?" Sarah asked. though she was beginning to fear the answer. "You've been coming and going at strange hours. Sometimes you'd leave in the morning and not return until very late at night. The housekeeping staff found your room yesterday and said it looked like you hadn't slept in the beds at all. Your children have been seen in the lobby at all hours, sometimes appearing confused about where their parents were." Sarah felt as if she were drowning. Nothing the officers were telling them aligned with her memories of the past few days, yet she couldn't deny the evidence they were presenting. "Where have we been?" she asked in a voice that sounded strange to her own ears. "If we weren't at the cabin, where have we been for 6 days?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Sheriff Bradley said. "But based on the personal items we found scattered in that forest clearing, and the fact that some of them show signs of weather exposure, I believe you and your family have been spending significant amounts of time in that area." "Are you saying we've been camping in the woods for a week?" David asked incredulously. "I'm saying something has been happening to your family that doesn't match your conscious memories of events." The implications of that statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. Memory loss, disorientation, missing time. These were symptoms of trauma, of psychological break or worse. "Do you think we've been drugged?" she asked, voicing the fear that was beginning to take shape in her mind. "We're going to arrange for medical examinations for all of you," Sheriff Bradley replied. "Blood tests, psychological evaluations, whatever's necessary to determine what you've been exposed to." As if summoned by the mention of medical care, Emma suddenly looked up from her coloring book with an expression of unusual clarity. "The nice man gave us special water," she said matter-of-factly. "He said it would help us sleep better in the mountains." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What nice man, sweetheart?" "The one who came to our room at the hotel. He brought bottles of water and said they had special mountain minerals in them. He said mountain visitors needed extra hydration." "When did this happen?" Officer Martinez asked, pulling out her notebook again. Emma scrunched her face in concentration. "The first day, I think. After we ate dinner in the restaurant downstairs, he knocked on our door and said the hotel wanted to make sure we stayed healthy during our mountain vacation." David was staring at his daughter with growing horror. "Emma, do you remember what this man looked like?" "He was tall and had a baseball cap. Like the maintenance man we met at the cabin." The room fell silent as the implications of Emma's revelations sank in. If someone had been drugging their family from the very first day of their vacation, it would explain the memory gaps, the confusion about time, and the strange sense of living in two different realities. "Sheriff," Sarah said urgently, "we need to find this man. If he's drugging families who come to this area, we're going to do everything we can to investigate this," Sheriff Bradley assured her. "But first, we need to get you and your family to the hospital for medical evaluation. If you've been given unknown substances, we need to know what they were and whether they've caused any lasting effects." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the conference room window. The woman looking back at her appeared exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a gauntness that suggested she hadn't been eating properly. David looked equally worn, and even the children seemed thinner than she remembered. How was it possible that they'd lost almost a week of their lives without realizing it? And what had really been happening to them during those missing days? As they drove through the night toward the regional medical center, Sarah found herself staring out at the dark mountain peaks and wondering what other secrets the wilderness was hiding. Somewhere out there, a dangerous predator was targeting families, stealing their memories and their time, and possibly doing things to them that were too terrible to remember. The beautiful mountain vacation that was supposed to bring her family closer together had become something far more sinister, and Sarah was beginning to suspect that their ordeal was far from over. The medical center's emergency department was quiet at that hour, allowing the Mitchell family to be seen quickly by Dr. Rebecca Santos, an experienced emergency physician who listened to their story with professional calm while arranging for blood tests and other examinations. As Sarah sat in the sterile hospital room, waiting for results, that might explain what had been done to her family. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the hospital windows, she sensed a presence that wished them harm, and deep in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning. Chapter 4. The Truth Beneath. The blood test results arrived at dawn, carried by Dr. Santos, with the grim expression of someone who had seen something she'd hoped never to encounter. Sarah sat up straighter in the hospital chair where she'd spent the night, automatically reaching for David's hand as the doctor approached their family cluster in the emergency department waiting area. "The tests confirm what we suspected," Dr. Santos said without preamble. "All 4 of you have significant levels of scopolamine in your systems, along with traces of several other compounds we're still working to identify." "What is scopolamine?" David asked, though Sarah could tell from his tone that he dreaded the answer. "It's sometimes called devil's breath," Dr. Santos explained. "It's a drug that can cause temporary amnesia, confusion, and a state where victims become highly suggestible. In higher doses, it can cause complete memory blackouts while leaving people conscious and functional." Sarah felt sick. "You're saying someone has been drugging us for almost a week? Based on the concentration levels and the half-life of the drug, yes. You've been receiving regular doses, probably daily, which would explain the extended period of memory loss and disorientation." Emma looked up from where she'd been curled against Sarah's side. "Does that mean the nice man was trying to hurt us?" Dr. Santos knelt down to Emma's eye level, her voice gentle but serious. "Sweetheart, someone gave you medicine that you didn't need, and that wasn't safe for children. But the good news is that you're all healthy now, and the medicine is leaving your body." Sheriff Bradley had arrived during the night and was waiting nearby with Officer Martinez. He approached their family group with a manila folder in his hands. "The hospital called me with the test results," he said. "This confirms that you've been the victims of a serious incident. We've been investigating through the night, and we've found some things you need to know about." He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "First, we contacted Airbnb directly. There is no listing for Mountain Vista Retreat at the address you provided. In fact, there's no host named Marcus Webb in their system at all." "But we have confirmation emails," David protested weakly. "We'd like to see those emails," Officer Martinez said, "because what you're describing sounds like an elaborate phishing scheme designed to lure families to an isolated location." Sarah pulled out her phone and navigated to her email, but as she scrolled through her messages, her confusion deepened. "I can't find them," she said. "The confirmation emails, the check-in instructions, they're not here." "Ma'am, do you remember actually booking the reservation? The specific steps you took online?" As Sarah tried to reconstruct the process of finding and booking the cabin, she realized that her memories of it were strangely vague, like trying to remember something she'd done while half asleep. "It's possible," Dr. Santos interjected, "that the initial contact and booking process also involved drugging. Scopolamine can be absorbed through skin contact or inhaled. If someone approached you in a public place, a coffee shop, a restaurant, even a parking lot, they could have exposed you to the drug without you realizing it." Sheriff Bradley nodded grimly. "We think that's exactly what happened. We've been reviewing security footage from businesses around Charlotte for the past week, looking for any contact between your family and unknown individuals." He pulled out a photograph from his folder, a still image from what appeared to be a security camera. "Mrs. Mitchell, do you recognize this man?" Sarah studied the photo, which showed a tall, lean figure in work clothes and a baseball cap, talking to a woman who looked like her outside a Starbucks. The woman in the photo was holding Emma's hand, while Jake stood nearby, and all of them were smiling as if having a pleasant conversation with a helpful stranger. "I don't remember this," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but that's definitely us. This was taken 8 days ago, 3 days, before you were supposed to check into the supposed Airbnb," Officer Martinez explained. "We believe this is when your family was first approached and drugged." David was staring at the photograph with growing horror. "So none of it was real? The entire vacation was some kind of, elaborate kidnapping?" "We're still trying to determine the full scope of what happened to you," Sheriff Bradley said. "But we've made some disturbing discoveries that suggest you weren't the first family targeted." He pulled out another set of photographs, and Sarah's heart sank as she saw images of personal belongings scattered throughout various locations in the mountain forest, children's toys, adult clothing, personal electronics, all weathered and partially buried, as if they'd been left in the wilderness for extended periods. We've found evidence of at least 6 other families who appear to have gone through similar experiences, Sheriff Bradley continued. Missing time, false vacation rentals, encounters with the same individuals you describe meeting. What happened to those families? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. 3 of them eventually returned home with no memory of what happened during their missing time. They reported their experiences to various law enforcement agencies, but without concrete evidence, the cases remained unsolved. And the other 3? Sheriff Bradley's expression grew even more grave. We're still looking for them. The full horror of their situation was beginning to dawn on Sarah. They hadn't just been the victims of a drugging incident, they'd been trapped in an elaborate system designed to control and manipulate families for unknown purposes. Why? David asked. What was the point of all this? We're still investigating, Officer Martinez said. But based on what we've learned from similar cases in other regions, we believe you may have been victims of what's called human conditioning, a process where people are repeatedly drugged and subjected to various forms of psychological manipulation. For what purpose? Sarah pressed. Sometimes it's for human trafficking, sometimes it's for psychological experimentation, sometimes... Officer Martinez paused, clearly reluctant to continue. Sometimes it's just because someone enjoys having complete control over other people. Emma, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the focused attention that children often brought to serious discussions, suddenly spoke up. The underground place, she said quietly. We spent time in the underground place. Every adult in the group turned to look at her. What underground place, sweetheart? Sarah asked gently. There were stairs going down into the ground, like a basement, but not in a house, and there were other rooms and other people. Sarah felt as if ice water had replaced the blood in her veins. Other people? Other families. They were sleeping a lot like us, but sometimes they were awake, and they seemed sad. Sheriff Bradley was taking rapid notes. Emma, can you remember anything else about this underground place? What it looked like, how you got there? Emma scrunched her face in concentration. The nice man would come to our hotel room and give us the special water. Then we would go in his truck, but I always fell asleep. When I woke up, we were in the underground place. How many times did this happen? Officer Martinez asked. Lots of times. Every day, I think. David was staring at his daughter with a mixture of horror and amazement. Emma, why can you remember this when the rest of us can't? Dr. Santos interjected with a possible explanation. Children's brains process drugs differently than adults. It's possible that Emma received smaller doses relative to her body weight, or that her natural resistance was higher. Sometimes children retain more memory fragments even when they've been drugged. Sheriff Bradley leaned forward. Emma, this is very important. Do you remember anything about how to get to this underground place? Did you see any landmarks or roads or anything that might help us find it? Emma thought for a long moment. There was a big tree with a face in it, like an angry face made out of the bark. And the man always stopped the truck there and made a phone call before we went to the underground place. That's very helpful, sweetheart, Officer Martinez said. Is there anything else you can remember about the people in the underground place? Other families. There was a lady with red hair who cried a lot, and a man who kept asking where his car was, and children who didn't want to play games. Emma paused, her small face growing troubled. Some of the people had been there for a really long time. Sarah pulled Emma closer, her protective instincts overwhelming her need for information. Her daughter had witnessed things that no child should ever see, had been exposed to dangers that would give Sarah nightmares for the rest of her life. Sheriff, she said urgently, we have to find this place. There are people there who need help. We're organizing a search operation as we speak, Sheriff Bradley assured her, based on Emma's description of the tree and the general area where your belongings were found. We have teams preparing to canvass the entire region. What about the man? David asked. Roy, or whatever his real name is. We've issued alerts to all law enforcement agencies in a 3-state area. The description Emma provided, combined with the security footage we've collected, gives us a good starting point. Dr. Santos checked her watch. I'd like to keep the family here for observation for another day, just to make sure there are no delayed effects from the drugs they were given. but medically I think they're going to be fine. Psychologically might be a different story, Sheriff Bradley said quietly. You should prepare yourselves for the possibility that more memories might return as the drugs completely clear your systems. Some of those memories might be difficult to handle. As if summoned by his words, Sarah suddenly felt a flash of memory so vivid it made her gasp. She was in a dimly lit underground space, lying on a narrow cot, while figures in dark clothing moved around her. There was the sound of crying somewhere in the distance and the constant hum of machinery. I remember something, she said shakily. I was lying on a bed, but not in the hotel, somewhere underground, like Emma said. And there were other people around me, but they all seemed empty, like they were awake, but not really there. David gripped her hand tighter. I'm starting to remember things too. Fragments like pieces of a nightmare, being led through corridors, sitting in a room with other people who wouldn't talk. This is normal, Dr. Santos assured them. As the scopolamine clears your system, suppressed memories often return. It might be uncomfortable, but it's a sign that your brain is healing. Over the next several hours, as the Mitchell family remained under medical observation, fragments of their lost week began to surface. They remembered being transported to an underground facility, being housed with other families who had also been drugged and controlled, and being subjected to various forms of psychological manipulation that they couldn't fully understand or remember. But most importantly, they remembered that they weren't alone. Somewhere in the mountains, other families were still trapped in the same nightmare they had escaped. It was late afternoon when Sheriff Bradley returned with news that would change everything. We found it, he announced as he entered their hospital room. Emma's description led us to the right location. We've discovered an extensive underground facility built into a natural cave system about 15 miles from where you were staying. Did you find the other families? Sarah asked immediately. Sheriff, Bradley's expression was a mixture of relief and continued concern. We found 12 people, including 3 children. They're all alive, but they're going to need extensive medical and psychological care. What about the people responsible? We arrested 4 individuals at the site, including the man you knew as Roy. His real name is Dennis Crawford, and he has a history of similar incidents in other states. Sarah felt a wave of relief so powerful it left her dizzy. It's over then. The immediate danger is over, Sheriff Bradley confirmed. But this investigation is just beginning. The facility we discovered was much more extensive than we initially suspected, and we believe this operation has been targeting families for several years. Why families? David asked. What was the point of all this? Sheriff Bradley exchanged a glance with Officer Martinez before answering. Based on preliminary evidence, we believe this was part of a larger human trafficking operation. Families would be drugged and conditioned over a period of weeks or months, then transported to other locations where they would be sold or used for various illegal purposes. The horror of what they had nearly become, what other families had become, was almost too much for Sarah to process. They had come so close to disappearing completely, to becoming just another set of missing persons, with no trace of what had happened to them. But Emma's memories saved us, she said suddenly, looking at her daughter with new amazement. If she hadn't been able to remember, your daughter is a very brave and smart little girl, Officer Martinez said. Without her information, we might never have found the facility or the people trapped there. As the sun set over the mountains that had been the backdrop for their ordeal, the Mitchell family began to plan their return home. There would be months of medical follow-up, psychological counseling, and testimony in the legal proceedings against their captors. Their lives had been fundamentally changed by an experience that still felt surreal and nightmare-like. But they were alive, they were together, and they had helped rescue other families from a fate too terrible to fully comprehend. Will we ever feel safe traveling again? Sarah asked David as they prepared to leave the hospital. I don't know, he answered honestly, but we'll figure it out together, all of us. Emma looked up from the new coloring book a nurse had given her. Are we still going to have family vacations? Sarah and David exchanged a look over their daughter's head, a look that contained all their love, their terror, their relief, and their determination to rebuild their sense of security and wonder. Yes, sweetheart, Sarah said finally. But next time, We're going to be much more careful about where we stay and who we trust. As they walked out of the hospital and into the mountain evening, Sarah caught herself scanning the parking lot and the surrounding area for threats. She knew it would be a long time before she could relax completely, before she could trust strangers or venture into isolated places without fear. But she also knew that they had survived something that might have destroyed other families. They had each other, they had their memories back, and they had played a role in stopping a monstrous operation that had preyed on innocent people. The mountains that had harbored such evil still rose majestically around them. But Sarah no longer saw them as places of beauty and peace. She saw them as they truly were, wilderness that could hide both wonder and terror, depending on who was watching from the shadows. As they drove away from Cedar Ridge and began the journey home, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and her family. They would heal from this experience, they would learn to trust again, and they would never forget how precious and fragile their safety truly was. The vacation that was supposed to create beautiful family memories had instead taught them that the world could be far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. But it had also shown them the strength of their love for each other and the power of speaking up when something felt wrong. Behind them, the mountain peaks faded into darkness, keeping their secrets and their scars. But the Mitchell family was going home, and that was enough. Dear friends, if this story has touched your heart and reminded you of the preciousness of family, the importance of trusting your instincts, and the courage it takes to speak up when something feels wrong, please take a moment to share it with others. Click that like button if this emotional journey resonated with you, and leave a comment below sharing your own thoughts about family safety and the power of maternal intuition. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that explore the depths of human experience, the beautiful, the terrifying, and everything in between. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories that remind us all to stay vigilant, to protect those we love, and to never give up hope, even in our darkest moments.